is where I want to be. Oh, New Hampshire, I love New Hampshire naturally. I love New Hampshire naturally.
Good evening. Years ago, a relatively obscure poet named Hugh Mearns wrote a poem called Psychoed. It says in its entirety, "As I went walking up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd go away." We have as our guest this evening a man who wasn't there at Tuesday night's Republican presidential candidates debate. At least he was not there on stage. And he is a candidate for president, for the Republican nomination for president. No, we don't have Fred Thompson here, but we do have John Cox, and we welcome John Cox to Real Hampshire. Mr. Cox has been running for the 2008 Republican presidential nomination for, is it over a year now? Or what?
Yeah, my first trip to New Hampshire was last March, so I've been here a total of 60 days in a lovely state.
I've been told this is your 16th trip.
It is.
All right.
It is, and I love New Hampshire, obviously. It's a great state. As a matter of fact, every time I go to Iowa and I come back to New Hampshire, I love New Hampshire even more because you're so compact and easy to get around.
Oh, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
Iowa's
campaigning in Iowa, yeah, could be
pretty spread out.
You put on the mileage pretty quickly, I'm sure.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that about the fact that some people may not want me to be there. They said that about Ronald Reagan in 1976.
Oh, absolutely.
He ran against an incumbent president
Gerald,
who hadn't been elected.
Gerald R. Ford, that's true, but he was the president
but he was
at the
president,
time. Yep.
And there were a lot of people in the Republican establishment who said, you know, why are you doing this? You're bringing up all these issues about the failings of Gerald Ford, and it might result in a loss.
Yeah.
In fact, Gerald Ford did lose, but I would argue that the country was better off because 4 years later, Ronald Reagan came back to win the presidency. I'm no Ronald Reagan, let me make that clear, but what I'm doing now is exactly what Ronald Reagan did in 1976, and that is I am pointing out where the Republican Party and the leadership, and I have to say the president, have not hewn to the principles of our party. They have not been fiscally disciplined. They have not shrunken the size of government. They've expanded it. And Jack, that is the essence of the message that I'm bringing, and maybe that's why I wasn't there last night.
All right. How do you distinguish yourself from the other candidates who are on the stage? I mean, there were 10 candidates, all of whom claim to be fiscal conservative, all of whom claim to believe in the principles of the Republican Party that Ronald Reagan espoused so well. What makes John Cox stand out? How would you have stood out if you were the 11th player on that stage last night?
Well, first of all, I think you used the right word, Jack, and that's claimed. The issue is, what have they done? And if you look at it, you've got 5 members of the U.S. Congress. Well, first of all, anybody who's running for president from the U.S. Congress, and I think that includes John McCain, has got to live with the stain of this Congress, at least for the last 6 years, when they were the majority party, the Republicans were, and they spent like it was water. They added debt without regard to the future consequences of that. They failed on immigration reform. They failed on Social Security reform. Hardly did a thing about tax reform. They got the tax cuts through, I'll give them that much, but this tax system got even more complicated in the last 6 years.
It's funny you should mention that because, you know, getting the tax cut is the easy part. And you know, being...
Well, it was because the economy was bad and people were looking to improve the economy.
Not only that, but, you know, I think George Will said it well once when he said, you know, the president asks the nation to be brave and endure a tax cut. And he said, you know, I can do the same thing. I can go out on my front stoop and holler out to the kids, you know, to the kids in the neighborhood, who wants to go for a pizza? And they'll all show up. The difficult part, of course, is the spending cuts. And I can remember being, you know, ancient, that a time when Republicans used to insist that there be spending cuts commensurate with the tax cuts.
Well, let's be clear on this, Jack. The reason that it's tough to cut spending, because that's the mother's milk of getting these guys reelected.
Okay,
I mean, let's face it, they're career politicians.
And if they're even, and
their whole livelihood is tied up in being in
and
politics.
that is as true of the fiscal conservatives as
Oh,
it is of
absolutely.
the so-called liberals.
It's got to change, though. The fact of the matter is, they spend and spend and spend and spend, add debt and debt and debt because it keeps them in office. They get to go back to their districts and they say, look, I got you this bike path or I've got you this bridge, and that's supposed to put them in touch with the voters. And what they're missing is the fact that there's a lot of voters out there who are looking at the tremendous debt, they're looking at the deficits, and they're saying, someday we got to pay this back. We don't want to be speaking Chinese or have our country owned by powers around the world. We want to be independent.
It's interesting. I heard, whatever else you might think of him, I think former President Clinton is a very intelligent man and a brilliant speaker. And I listened to a talk he gave once, and I thought he made a very interesting point. He said, we have problems with China on trade issues and patent and copyright issues and so forth. And we talk about, getting tough with China. He said, but China is our banker. When's the last time you got tough with your banker? And that is part of the problem.
Well, and they're a great customer of ours as well as we are a customer of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think trade with China is a wonderful thing, and I think it'll get bigger and better.
Are you concerned about the balance of trade deficit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I wouldn't do what Duncan Hunter suggests. I wouldn't put tariffs, because then you've got a situation where you've got trade wars and tariffs are a way for governments to get more money and put a crimp on activity, business activity. I'd rather improve the outlook for jobs in America by changing America and our economic environment. And how? Get rid of the income tax and go to the fair tax, change our regulatory structure, and get rid of the fear of trial lawyers that every business has to go through. If we do those things, Jack, business will have a reason to stay in America. And even though labor is a lot cheaper elsewhere, there's a lot of other costs that are involved and a lot of other reasons why businesses leave beyond labor costs.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about some of those issues. We probably won't get to all of them in the limited time we have. But before the time gets away from us, let's talk a little bit about John Cox, who you are, what you do, and why you want to be president. Now, as far as what you do, I notice you're wearing a nice suit and you wear it well, so you're probably not a journalist. You're a successful businessman, I understand. What kind of business have you been in?
I'm a CPA and an investment advisor.
First of all, we probably ought to locate you. You're from Illinois.
Chicago. Born and raised, South Side. I'm a Sox fan for all your listeners.
I was going to ask her.
But it's the White Sox.
I know.
I'm afraid it's not the Red Sox. Although I was happy that they finally won. Cubs haven't quite gotten there yet.
The White Sox did win a World Series.
As we say in Chicago, the White Sox fans anyway, we say anybody can have a bad century. So
yes.
and that's what the Cubs have had. In any event, I'm the son of a single mom. I worked my way through school. I started businesses, and that I think differentiates me from a lot of people who are in politics. I mean, Mitt Romney, Steve Forbes inherited businesses and inherited a wonderful, wealthy lifestyle. I didn't. I mean, I started at the bottom like most Americans, and I think that may, give me more of an identification with people. I have a CPA background, a real estate background. I owned a manufacturing company, the largest snack food company in Chicago, and turned that company around. So I think I've got 30 years of business experience, basically, that have prepared me to solve problems, which I think is better experience, Jack, than having been in politics for my whole career.
Solving problems is fine. One of the problems I have with a lot of presidential candidates and a lot of people who are interested in the presidential race is that the problems they want the next president to solve are not problems for, rightly viewed, are not problems for the president or the Congress to solve. Education, for example. I mean, I went to a forum the other day where they had this huge mass of people. They had all.
That's the Ed in 08.
Ed in 08.
The Bill Gates.
And I
Bill
told
Gates
them, they had about as many people behind the lectern as they did in the audience. And I said, with all of, we had the mayor, we had former mayor, you had the former governor, you had all these people there. And I said, with all of the background and experience and brain power you've got behind that lectern there, Why are you waiting for or insisting that the next president tell you how he's going to improve our
It's
schools?
all about getting attention, and let's face it, I'm for great education. Who isn't? I mean, that's like being against oxygen. I mean, of course you're in favor of education. The issue is how we get there. And my concern is that we've spent huge additional amounts on education over the last 30 years. We've doubled after inflation our spending on education in this country, and our test scores have not gotten better. To me, that says something's wrong with the structure of education. It's not a factor of money necessarily, it's a factor of how that money's used. And my concern is that Ed in 08, one of their key points is you got to pay teachers a lot more money, which I am happy to do, by the way. We need to attract better people into teaching, but I think it's not just about money, it's about the bureaucracy, it's about how the money's used, it's about paying teachers based on how well they do, about merit, about quality, about competition. It's not about how much money is being spent.
But are those issues we should be addressing at the federal level?
No,
or should
absolutely
okay.
not.
Okay.
I'm a proponent of getting rid of the education department. I think the federal education department is a bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. It accumulates a whole stack of paper from school districts all around the country, but the education department doesn't teach a child.
No.
It's just like the Homeland Security Department.
Or the Department of Energy, which the Republican
doesn't
platform
produce any energy.
That's right. Used to call for its abolition too. I don't know if it's still.
Well, I am,
yeah.
Because they don't do anything. I mean,
right.
They accumulate a lot of reports and they issue a lot of reports that nobody reads. But at the end of the day, what really produces are people at a local level, people in the private sector, people who create and innovate each and every day. That's what really solves our problems, and the government bureaucracy just is a figurehead and a PR move to make somebody think that you really care about the topic. Education ought to be done at a local level. That's one of the faults I have with President Bush, and that is that No Child Left Behind was a huge increase in its spending, but it didn't really give parents a choice. It didn't really provide a way out. It didn't really improve the quality, and it put a lot of extra burdens on local school districts that distracted them from the real things that they needed to do.
Well, as you know, the 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated by this Constitution to the United States nor denied by it to the states are reserved to the states and the people respectively. The Constitution delegates, by the way I counted, exactly 4 powers that the federal government has in the field of education. 0, zilch, nada, and none. 5 if you count not a damn thing. And that's another reason why the federal government should not be involved in education.
Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education as a PR move, and let's face it, and it's been something that you can just throw money at to make it look like you believe in better education. And that's what the problem is here, Jack, and that's one of the reasons I'm running. We've got the career political class who think that just throwing money at things is a way to make themselves look better so they stay in office forever. Statesmanship is what we need. Solving problems. Effective action that will solve our challenges. I don't see that from this crop of candidates on either side. And it's very early yet, and I think when my message gets through about that, people are going to be looking to join with me in finding a way to get to these solutions.
Now, have you ever held political office?
I've been a school board president. I've been involved in charities and a lot of things in the public world, but no, I've run for the U.S. Senate in Illinois. I'm not a political
You ran
neophyte.
against Senator
Well,
Obama?
I was in the Republican primary when Obama was running in the Democratic primary. Okay. So we actually participated in a couple of debates together.
Who won your primary? Alan Keyes?
No, he was brought in against my judgment, but he was brought in at the last minute. No,
something happened to the nominee.
Yeah, he got caught up in a scandal, and it was a whole debacle. But the bottom line is, I've had experience. I was the president of the Cook County Republican Party, so there's no question.
So you know where the bodies are buried, right?
Well, I know politics. I'm no political neophyte. I mean, Steve Forbes had never done anything in politics before he ran for president. I at least have had some experience. I was one of the original members of the Club for Growth, so I'm not an election year convert to any issue.
Okay.
I've been involved
not a leap year conservative.
No. I've been a Club for Growth member for 20 years.
Right.
I've been an activist in the pro-life movement for 25 years. So I have a long history in conservative causes, and I think that's kind of important in this year when you see a lot of these guys who are election year converts.
Well, you mentioned Steve Forbes a time or two. Let me ask you, first of all, you know, Steve Forbes said, I think when he first entered the presidential fray, that he didn't want to get in himself, but, you know, the campaign finance laws didn't allow him to simply write a check
Right.
for $20 million to Jack Kemp, for example.
Exactly.
You've seen, you've looked at, I'm sure, the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform. What do you think of it?
It's the wrong thing to do. I mean, John McCain has made a lifetime of crusading against money in politics, and that's because he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar with Charlie Keating a long time ago. My answer to this whole thing is that what we got to do, Jack, is elect people that can't be bought.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're never going to get money out of politics, and,
No.
and money is political speech, whether we like it or not. I mean, if I have money and I go out and print a bunch of leaflets and distribute them, that's political speech.
Sure.
That's what Sam Adams and Ben Franklin did 230 years ago.
Right.
That shouldn't be restricted. Actually, that should be encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do, though, is we need to have people who can't be bought, who won't sell their souls for a career job.
Okay.
I think the fault lies with the fact that we as voters keep electing these guys as career politicians, and they keep going there to make money for themselves, not to really do good policy.
Yeah. You also mentioned the fair tax. Now, what's the fair tax?
That's a national sales tax, and it would replace the current tax code. It would replace the payroll tax. It would end the
We do
discrimination.
away with the IRS.
Do away with the IRS, which is $10 billion a year.
Which could be, at least in some cases, considered a terrorist organization.
Well, you know, there's some nice people that work for the IRS, I'm sure, but
Oh,
I've dealt
absolutely.
with them for years. I've dealt with the tax code for 30 years. I'm a
But
CPA.
the power they have is scary.
Well,
I mean, you know, when they come at you.
The tax code is so complicated and so ridden with loopholes, and it puts us at odds with our government. Why do we do this? The reason the tax code exists the way it does, Jack, is because of career politicians. They sell the loopholes
Yeah.
in exchange for political contributions. Let's go to the fair tax. It gets rid of all that complication, the $300 billion a year of wasted effort and money we spend doing our taxes. And the fair tax is fair. It exempts the poor. It's not regressive. As a matter of fact, it's progressive. It gets rid of the payroll tax, which is the most regressive tax that we have out there. And I think it'll generate economic growth that we haven't seen since the Reagan years, since Reagan cut the marginal rates to 28%.
So if we do away with the income tax and replace it with this fair tax, at what level? The national sales tax at what level?
Well, remember, the payroll tax is 16%.
Okay.
8% on the employee, 8% on the employer. That's gone. So the payroll, the fair tax is about 23% right now. That's the number the economists have said at. That number would vary based upon how big the economy is and how much revenue you need to generate. You know, Washington doesn't have a revenue problem, as you understand. Washington has a spending problem. So the fair tax isn't going to solve the spending problem. That's a different issue, obviously, that I need to attack, and I will do that.
But if I want to go out and buy a car, let's say I'm going to buy a new car, I would have to spend an additional 23% on that purchase?
But remember, your salary is not taxed anymore.
Right.
You're not paying a FICA tax, so you've got far more spending power. And I'll tell you one other thing. The companies that made that car won't pay income tax anymore. The company that made the steering wheel, the company that made the rugs, the company that made the steel, the company that made the electronics.
So you're doing it with corporate taxes as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Every tax, the death tax, the payroll tax, the income tax, every federal tax goes away except for this 23% sales tax. And believe it or not, the 23% is enough to fund the exact amount of revenue the income tax collects today. And the reason for that is because the income tax is so easily dodged, Jack.
Yeah.
You can move your income. And I know because I've done it for clients. I've set up tax shelters for clients in other countries legally, but it can be done.
So what would you exempt now? Because
And
you
it's
said,
wrong.
See, because you said the poor wouldn't have to pay it, so you'd exempt food and rent and
No,
things?
no. You'd exempt the first $15,000 apiece for every man and woman in
How do you
America.
keep track of that? How do you keep track of where
Oh,
I
that's
spend
the-
my first
It's
$15,000
the-
if I...
You don't have to
have
keep
it.
track of it. That's the beauty of it. The federal government every single month will spit out a check to you and to me and to your wife and to my wife for $250 a month.
I'm not married. Can I get 2 checks then?
No.
Okay.
Every adult over 21 years old, every legal U.S. citizen, by the way, doesn't go to illegal immigrants, but every U.S. resident and every U.S. citizen who would be the ones who would pay the fair tax, would be the sales tax, they would get a check from the government for $250. Now, I will pay far more than $250 a month in sales tax because I spend a lot, because I make a lot. But a poor person, that might be all that they spend. And that might be all the tax that they pay.
Right.
And in which case, they're zero. They're even. They pay no, basically, net sales tax. So they're, even. That's the beauty of it. And you don't have to rely on some form either. It's not like I'll have to fill out a form and send it to the government to get my $250 check. Now, will there be fraud? Of course, some people will try to game the system and get more than one $250 check. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's what we have U.S. attorneys for, is to go after fraud. But we have fraud with the tax code now, obviously. So,
no.
I mean, yes,
really?
I'm sorry to say.
Okay, all right.
It's an open invitation for
Listen,
fraud.
I don't want to let this half hour go fleetingly by without touching on foreign policy a little bit.
We have to do that. We have to.
How would you get us out of Iraq?
It's an economic problem as much as it is a military problem. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And how do I know that, Jack? In Baghdad and Fallujah, the unemployment rate's 60–70%. The electricity works a few hours a day. We have built electrical facilities that aren't even open yet, that are sitting there mothballed because of the incompetence and the corruption that's going on. Contrast that with the north part of Iraq, Kirkuk. You go to that area, people are working, people are happy, they fly American flags, they welcome Americans. Why? Because the economy is working in the north part of Iraq, because that's where they're producing oil. So what's the answer? Not more soldiers. You got a place where there's 10 million people unemployed. You could put 1 million soldiers on the ground and you're not going to get people happy about the situation. What you've got to do is get that oil pumping, get that money into the population, get people believing in their future. People want prosperity. I know that there's ancient religious rivalries between Sunni and Shia. Yeah, that's what everybody uses. And of course, when you're economically desperate and you've got all these things going on around you, you're going to probably fall back on those ancient rivalries. But if we get that oil going and we get people believing in their future, that's going to show that the U.S. believes in prosperity. People are going to put aside their differences. And how do I know that? Because the Sunni and Shia live side by side in Saudi Arabia. They live in the same communities in Kuwait. They marry each other in many of these communities. They don't fight. And why? Because those countries provide for their health care. Those countries provide a strong economy and a prosperous environment. Iran is a huge problem for us in the future. Wouldn't it be a great message to send to the Iranian people that the U.S. has brought prosperity to Iraq, that Iraqis are prosperous and happy? The Iranian economy is going downhill. They're producing less oil every year. The mullahs are isolating that country from the rest of the world. That's not a good thing for the Iranian people. I think the Iranian people will throw off those mullahs, will stop the nuclear program on their own when they discover that the Iraqis are enjoying prosperity and they're not.
Assuming we get out of Iraq at some point in the next few years, will the next war be with Iran?
I'm suggesting it doesn't have to be. I'm suggesting that if we get the job done in Iraq, and the job means not 1 million soldiers, but prosperity, the Iranian people, which is a young population, it's an educated population, they'll rebel just like the Polish people did. We won the Polish people's freedom without firing a shot. And we didn't win it, the Polish people did.
Right.
They struck, they rebelled against their oppressive government. And why? Because they saw the rest of Western Europe going gangbusters. They saw the European Union, they saw all these things working. They wanted a piece of that prosperity. They saw people waiting in line for toilet paper in the Soviet Union. They didn't want that anymore.
Well, we had that marvelous contrast between East and West Berlin for so many years.
Absolutely.
And look at why they had to build a wall.
And look at what's happening now. Latvia, Estonia, Bulgaria, Hungary. The former Eastern Bloc is prosperous and democratic and peaceful. I believe that's what can happen in Iran. I don't think it's a pie-in-the-sky idea. I think it's what people want. I think at the end of the day, I don't think people want war. At the end of the day, I don't think people want death and destruction. I think people want prosperity. I think they want children. I think they want food to eat and a roof over their heads. And if the American people, if the American experience is all about helping other countries be successful, I believe we as a nation will be successful too. It can be a win-win proposition.
Increasingly in presidential elections, we've seen voters urged to vote for this candidate or that because of who this candidate or that would likely appoint to the Supreme Court. What kind of justices would you appoint to the Supreme Court?
Clearly, I believe a lot of the problems we have on social conservative issues, abortion, marriage, relate to the fact that our decisions on this are being taken away from the people in general. You know, so it's not just about how or what we do, but it's also about who makes these decisions. You know, I mean, our little experiment here of 230 years is all about democracy, and it's all about people feeling like they have a voice. When 9 robed justices take it upon themselves to decide that one trimester is important or more important than another trimester in birth, that's a decision that people object to because it's being done away from their own power, and that's not what we do, and that's why we fought a war against a king 230 years ago. So absolutely I would appoint judges who don't take these decisions on themselves and leave it to state legislatures, and that means people who restrain themselves.
Yeah. Article 3, Section 2, I believe it is, of the Constitution says that the Supreme Court will have appellate power in cases except where Congress makes exceptions. Would you urge Congress to make some exceptions on where the Supreme Court would have appellate authority?
No, I think, as you said, the 10th Amendment provides that power goes to the states. That's not reserved to the federal government. But the Supreme Court seems not to have looked at the 10th Amendment for a long time. No, nor has Congress. You know, we got to get back to this idea that we're competent enough to decide for ourselves a lot of these issues. I mean, the whole direction, it seems to me, of the Democratic Party these days is we're too stupid to do things for ourselves.
Or they're so smart, so much smarter than we. Yeah.
Or the government is so much smarter. So,
absolutely.
So we can't choose our doctors. We can't choose our life. We can't choose our education. We can't basically provide for our own retirement.
Quickly, because we're running out of time.
I don't agree with that.
Do you have a solution for people who just don't have enough money to buy their own health insurance?
Yes. It's to bring down the cost of health care. I mean,
how do you do that?
More supply.
Yeah.
Adam Smith, the invisible hand, economics. No matter how smart any of these politicians are, they can't repeal the laws of economics.
We reduce. Okay, we've got to close on that note, and I want to thank John Cox for being here, and I hope you'll be back.
I'd love to be back, Jack.
I know you have spent and will be spending a lot of time in New Hampshire.
I am.
Thanks very much for watching. Tune in next week for another edition of Real Hampshire.
New Hampshire is where I want to be. Oh, New Hampshire, I love New Hampshire naturally. I love New Hampshire naturally.